just finished watching The Devil's Business, which happens to be Sean Hogan's latest film. I'd like to thank everybody for coming, and Sean Hogan. You alluded to before that you had some issues making this movie, I guess reaction to your last film.
Yeah, it was
Little Deaths.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's way too much bullshit that happened on Little Deaths to even go into it, but essentially we had to fight for the cut, we had to fight to get people paid, the execs tried to steal the film away from us. By the end of it, I was like, remind me why I even wanted to make movies again. It was just like, this was so much trouble. I mean, we got the film finished to a state where I was happy with it, but I was happy with the film and not about anything else that had happened during the making of it. So, and I'd written the script for The Devil's Business prior to that, when we'd just been talking about the idea of doing something small and cheap that we could control anyway. So I had the script ready. And then after that experience, you know, my producer turned around to me and she said, look, why don't we just go and do The Devil's Business? We'll just raise whatever money we can raise and we'll do it for that. And we'll control it, we'll own it. And we'll just, you know, it'll be a palate cleanser. It will hopefully give us our faith back in terms of making movies, which is, you know, essentially it did. But yeah, we did it in 9 days. We did it for very little money. We just pulled in a lot of favors. But, you know, it was a joy to do. I mean, it was hard work, but yeah, it really sort of did cleanse my palate, as it were.
Now, The Devil's Business is a bit of a genre mashup. It's gangster and horror. How did this idea come about?
The initial idea was kind of after a few too many of these. And we were actually just talking about the idea of doing something small and cheap. And it suddenly popped into my head. There's a Harold Pinter play called The Dumb Waiter, which is essentially like two hitmen waiting around for their victim to turn up. And it just suddenly hit me. I was like, you could do a horror version of that. And so that was the seed from kind of which it grew. It's like two things that I love, sort of like crime, film noir, and then horror. I thought it'd be interesting to kind of start off as one thing and then gradually turn it into something else. So that was kind of the starting point for it.
When you cast this, like, you actually had experience with these actors before, or was this the first time you ever met them?
Not really, no. Billy, who plays Pinner, was literally the first guy that came in to read for that part. And I just kind of fell in love with him instantly. And my producer was like, yeah, we've got other people to read today, you know, you can't cast the first guy you read. I'm like, no, I'll do my job, I will see everyone else. But at the end of the day, she was like, so what do you reckon? I was like, Billy, just walked it, he was great. And Jack, who plays Cully, my producer had sort of a good relationship with his agency, so she just sort of said, have you got anyone that would be up for this and you think is good? And they sent Jack in, and again, came in, he was like a ball of energy in the audition. I was like, yeah, he's perfect. The thing is about Jack is that he was actually doing this whole method thing throughout the shoot. He came in and he was like telling us stories about his background, and you know, was sort of very close to the character, and we were like, wow, that's really interesting. And then after the fact, Jen, the producer, spoke to his agent. His agent was like, that's all crap. Jack's a nice middle-class boy, and he was just being a method actor. And we never knew. He was very convincing.
Now, your prior films have all been solidly rooted in the supernatural. Mm-hmm. So obviously you're a fan of the supernatural.
I love the supernatural. I love the idea that you can kind of take these ideas and these images and use them as kind of like symbols or metaphors or something. You know, it's just a way of storytelling that interests me. It's like, you know, you can use these things to comment on other issues. This was great about horror, is you can kind of make movies about whatever you want to make. But as long as you've got like something weird or supernatural in it, you know, when you go to people for money, they're going to go, oh yeah, well, you've got monsters in it, it's great. And then, but essentially you can kind of sneak in stuff underneath. I've always loved horror, I grew up watching it. But the thing I love about it the most is that you can kind of do whatever you want to do within that framework. And I grew up watching like 70s horror movies, and a lot of them have a real subtext to them. But you know, they could do it because everyone was just like, yeah, it's a great drive-in movie, it's fine, you know. So that's what's kind of cool and subversive about horror, I think.
Now, in Lie Still, House and Home, which is from Little Deaths, and even in Devil's Business, you don't do a lot of hand-holding. You don't kind of explain everything out, and the audience has to think a little bit.
I hate backstory.
You hate backstory?
Backstory brings me out in a rash.
And why is that?
There just seems to be an increasing like tendency in like certainly modern Hollywood movies to explain everything. And I can't stand that. It's like you don't need to know everything. And horror, certainly for me, is scarier if you don't understand everything. It's like the unknown is scarier than when you go, well, yeah, but this is why it happened and blah, blah, blah. And, you know, it's more terrifying if you don't really grasp things. Paddy Chayefsky, who wrote Network and several other things, he had a phrase for this kind of writing. He called it rubber ducky writing, where it's like the character's like this because he lost his rubber ducky when he was a kid, and it's like that. I can't abide that kind of writing. So that's how I make horror movies. But again, it probably gets me into trouble because people want to know more, and I'm like, I don't want to tell you.
You did a short thing for Fright Fest for the thing, which we'll actually be seeing today.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, you edited a Halloween fake trailer. I believe it was.
So that was
Halloween H33.
That was part of the that was part of the same series of shorts. So there's a big UK horror festival called Fright Fest, which is like the centerpiece of horror in the UK, and it's really the kind of everything sort of revolves around Fright Fest in the UK. And so every year they've been making like a series of shorts, but they wanted to do something different that year. And so we spoke to them about it, and we said, well, look, they were meant to be getting Carpenter in as a guest of honor. So we said, well, look, why don't we do 5 shorts based around Carpenter movies? And everyone obviously took a different approach. Mine was kind of like a set in the world of the thing, sort of sometime afterwards. It was kind of almost like a semi-sequel in some ways.
Okay.
The Halloween one, which I've sort of like edited as a favour because they lost their editor at the last minute, that was much more of a kind of goofy take on Halloween, sequels, endless Halloween sequels. Yeah, that's kind of as close to a remake as I've come so far.
Most horror anthologies have some sort of connecting device, whether it's a crypt keeper, a puppet, or some sort of haunted element that connects all the stories. With Little Deaths, you didn't have that.
We didn't want to make an anthology that was kind of backwards looking. We wanted it to be sort of relatively modern. And we kind of thought it would be a bit old school to have a framing device. So in the end, we decided against it. And then also it was the fact that whilst we thought that the 3 stories kind of worked well together thematically, they were all very sort of different worlds. And so it kind of seemed weird to try and present them as part of the same world, if you liked, which having a framing story kind of inevitably does. So in the end, we looked at something like 3 Extremes or whatever and said, you know what, let's just put them together, and the tie between them is, the whole sex and horror thing. That's the thematic link. There is nothing beyond that.
This must have been an interesting, I guess, conversation with you and the other directors when you came up with this. It's basically a fetish horror movie, and I can't think of another way to describe this. How did this kind of gestate?
That was purely by accident, which probably says a lot about us. I'd spent a year working on another movie, and I'd written it and spent a year developing it, and then all of a sudden the money fell out and the project was dead. So I kind of felt like I'd wasted a year, and I was a bit pissed off about it all. And then so I suddenly thought, I want to make something, and I want to make something quickly, and what would be a way to do that? And I suddenly thought anthology movie. There hasn't been a good one for a while, and it's not like making a feature, it's like making 3 short movies. So we could do that, we could pull that together. And I kind of met the other guys that were involved in it. And so I kind of went to them and said, hey guys, why don't we do an anthology? And they were like, yeah, let's do it. And then it turned out to not be quick and easy, it turned out to be very, very difficult. But essentially, all we did was just sit down and say, okay, well, let's all go away and come up with a couple of ideas that we might want to do, and then we'll come back and discuss them. And then what we found was when we came back and discussed them, we'd all had these bizarre ideas that all revolved around sex and horror for some reason. And so, we were like, okay, that's the movie. Let's run with that, let's do that.
Casting must have been interesting on this. What was this like, bringing in especially the women on this one?
Well, we sent it out to a few bigger actors, and everyone was, the agents were coming back to us going, well, how dare you send my client this pornography? So we were like, okay, well, we'll just go for the best actors we can find rather than name actors. We did eventually manage to find some people that would come in and read, but even then, Holly, who plays the homeless girl in my episode, I read her, loved her, and she was like, yeah, no, it doesn't worry me, I'm not worried about the material, it's fine, I'm really up for it. And so I offered it to her, and she turned it down.
Really?
And then so I was like, okay. So then I went to the second girl on my list, who also turned it down. And I was like, oh my god, even the people who are coming in to read for it are now turning it down. But in the end, Holly's agent kind of rang us up and said, look, she kind of wants to do it, but she's just a bit worried, and if the director will speak to her about everything and lay her fears to rest, then I'm sure we can make it happen, which is what we did. But it was extremely difficult to cast.
Now, to give a little shout out to The Haunting of 24.
Excuse me?
Or Lie Still. That's kind of closer kind of in setup to The Devil's Business. And you've kind of sandwiched both films with like a nasty little center.
Yeah.
Can we expect your next film to be nasty as well?
I've got 2 or 3 things that we're working on. So one of them is definitely more outrageous. One of them is more of a sort of psychological horror. So yeah, I kind of like to sort of ping pong between the 2 poles.
Okay.
It's like I really like the sort of slow burn atmospheric stuff, but sometimes you just kind of want to, you know, throw blood up the wall and whatever.
Sean, thanks a lot.
Thank you
We
very
appreciate
much,
your
man.
time. Thanks for coming over and spending some time with us.